Don't drive. Your wife has disabled the brakes. The homeless man shouted, changing the millionaire's life forever. What if a billionaire living at the top of his own skyscraper finds himself one step away from death and is saved by a man he never even noticed? This isn't a story about a fall. It's a story about an epiphany. When the world in which you are God collapses, and you suddenly realize that true power comes from the one who can simply speak the truth, even if he lives on the streets. Before we begin, write in the comments what part of the world you are watching from today. If he had left 5 minutes earlier that day, everything would have turned out differently. If the homeless man hadn't listened to the voices behind the bushes, the man on the 20th floor would have died without knowing who killed him. Michael Thompson looked out at the evening Chicago through the tinted glass of his penthouse. Before we begin, write in the comments what part of the world you are watching from today. The warm light of skyscrapers swirled outside the windows, and rivers of headlights flowed below. He held a glass of a rare wine in his hands, but he couldn't even taste it. Everything had become the same. He'd achieved it all, from a small construction firm to a giant corporation with projects across the country. Every brick, every crane, every contract. He'd built his empire himself and now sat at the top. But inside, it was empty. The house was quiet. Lauren hadn't yet returned from yet another social event. Or maybe she had. He'd long since stopped hearing her enter the bedroom. She had become different, not the vibrant, lively woman he'd once fallen in love with. Her eyes had become genuinely cold, glassy. And although she still showed up at his business parties, resting her hand on his elbow and smiling for photographers, at home, a wall stood between them. Not an argument, not a quarrel, but indifference. But today, something unsettling was bothering Michael. The day before, he'd overheard her phone conversation. She thought he was asleep. Whispers. Short sentences. I told him to go alone. Everything is ready. And after that, everything will be ours, I promise. He thought he had misheard or misunderstood. He couldn't believe she was capable of something like that. He couldn't and wouldn't. Meanwhile, outside a nondescript cafe in a neighborhood where businessmen didn't frequent, Tristan Brown huddled in a worn army pea coat. He sat on a bench opposite the facade, peering into the windows. He was here almost every day, not begging, not drinking, just sitting. People with coffee passed by, not noticing him, but he saw a lot. He remembered how he had once dined here with his wife, before cancer took her, before the factory closed, and he was denied compensation for an injury. Before the street, one accident, and 3 other people's decisions. He was used to not interfering. He knew his voice meant nothing. But that day, behind the bushes nearby, he heard voices, a woman's and a man's. He will be alone. It's simple. Say it was an accident. After that, everything will be ours. You know that. He didn't want to listen, but he couldn't leave. He knew such conversations. Too much pain and loss taught him to distinguish lies from the truth. The next morning, he was sitting at the cafe again when he saw him, a man in a gray coat, expensive, clean. It was Michael Thompson. He walked to his car and started the engine. And then Tristan noticed something strange. The stranger, who had just been at the car, quickly disappeared around the corner. There was something unnatural in his movements. His back was hunched, his gaze from under his brows. He acted like a thief, but did not take anything. Tristan hesitated, but then he got up and went to Michael. "Excuse me," he began, feeling his face grow hot. "Don't get in the car yet." "What?" Michael frowned. "Who are you anyway?" "Listen, I saw a guy by your car. He was doing something there. I don't know what exactly, but it looked bad." Michael almost chuckled. He was on the verge of driving away. But there was such sincerity, such concern in the eyes of this shabby old man that he froze. "Are you serious? You think someone would get into my car? Seriously?" Tristan answered quietly. "Check it out or call someone, please." Michael called a mechanic. Half an hour later, the verdict came. The brake system was cut. It wasn't a malfunction, it was intentional. He was silent, looking at the homeless man who saved his life, and didn't know what to say. That same night, he returned to the penthouse. Lauren was already home. She said she was glad he made it, and kissed him on the cheek, barely missing. Michael looked at her, and could no longer ignore the obvious. Behind the facade of a perfect life there were cracks, behind the glass, an abyss. And if he wants to survive, he needs to start looking at the world not from the top down, but from the bottom up. The morning after the assassination attempt began with Michael sitting in his office for an hour, staring at the wall. The documents on his desk remained untouched. His head was buzzing, not from the wine, but from thoughts. He was like the man who controls everything: deals, contractors, the media, even the courts. But yesterday, all of this had proven useless. If it hadn't been for the homeless man, he would have died. He would have simply died in an accident. Another rich, tired man who overestimated his reflexes. Everyone would sympathize. Lauren would have gone into mourning, and then freedom and money. The thought of it constricted his throat. He picked up the phone and scrolled through the call list. There was one strange one, arriving late at night without a number. Then a message from Lauren. "I hope you had a good trip. There's dinner tomorrow, important guests." Cold, standard. Without a single sign of alarm, he dialed his personal driver. "Ed, that evening when I went home myself, you were free, weren't you?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Thompson asked me not to go. She said you were traveling alone due to your mood." Michael was silent. This was the second detail, too similar to intentionality. Meanwhile, Tristan came to that same cafe again. His face was known, but no one knew his name. He could disappear forever, and no one would look for him. He knew he could have simply forgotten everything he'd heard and stayed out of it. But he didn't regret it. It was a feeling he'd forgotten years ago. He was needed again, at least once. Suddenly, a car pulled up next to him, black and shiny, with a gloved driver. Michael himself stepped out of the back door. "Get in," he said simply. Samuel didn't ask where he was getting into. The car pulled away. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. "Why did you believe me?" Tristan finally asked. "I don't trust people." Michael's voice was even, "But I know what fear looks like." "And there was none in your eyes. There was something else. Responsibility. That's rare these days." He paused. "Tell me what you heard that day." Samuel repeated the conversation, every phrase he remembered. There were no names, but the woman's voice, the intonation, the words, everything matched what he heard from Lauren that night. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because I have no evidence," Samuel shrugged. "And when you're homeless, you're not a witness. You're just a strange guy who imagined things." Michael nodded. "Then we'll find proof." 2 days later, a meeting was held in one of the business centers, where there were only closed private offices. Michael hired a former investigator, an internal investigation specialist. His name was Keller, a man of about 60, with a calm face, without sentimentality. "What do you have?" Chase asked him. "Cut brakes." The wife told the driver not to come. Strange calls. The conversation of a homeless man who heard something suspicious. Keller nodded, then looked at Tristan. "You understand that now you are the only witness. If there is a conspiracy behind this, you are in danger." "I understand," he answered simply. "And are you still ready?" Michael clarified. "Ready." Tristan nodded, because a person should not die just because he has an expensive car. The first thing Keller did was order an examination of the brakes, independent, not associated with Michael's company. A day later, the report came. Traces of deliberate tampering, cut pipes, disguised shoe prints. All this confirmed one thing. It was an attempt on his life. The second step was eavesdropping. Michael installed hidden microphones in the house, in the living room, in the study, even in the dressing room. Everything secretly, without Lauren's knowledge. He himself was almost never at home. Excuses, work, business trips. The recordings were long, mostly silence and music. But on the third night, her voice was heard in the office, not with someone, but with the phone. "He's still alive. I don't know how. Everything was supposed to work. No, don't call me here. I'll get in touch myself. We need to think of something else. He'll come to me after all. You know." After this recording, Keller looked at Michael. "Your home is not a home. It's a battlefield." Michael looked at the streets of Chicago, but not from the top anymore. He was sitting in the car next to Tristan, not a driver, not a security guard, but an advisor. They drove past shelters, ruins, the very same areas that his company once cleared for development. "You wouldn't have let me into your office before," Tristan quietly remarked. "I used to think that the world was divided into winners and losers," Michael replied. "But now I understand that sometimes only the one who has nothing to lose can tell the truth." They didn't know that there would be even more pain ahead, because exposing is one thing, but admitting that you lived in illusions, something completely different. On the 5th day after the investigation began, Keller brought a flash drive. It contained a recording obtained from one of the microphones hidden in the closet. He played it in Michael's office. "You call me here again. You have no idea what's at stake." He's still alive. Yes, the brakes didn't work. No, he doesn't suspect anything yet. Yes, I told him I love him. As always, that's all that's required of me. Lauren's voice, cold, emotionless, the familiar voice of an actress who hasn't acted in a long time, but still plays a role. Michael looked at the screen, but didn't see. His face went white. His jaw clenched tensely. Everything he was afraid to hear now sounded in numbers and waves. "We can go to the police now," Keller said. "Break analysis, recording, witness. Enough to get started." Michael nodded, but slowly. Something inside him resisted. He couldn't understand why his heart wasn't screaming. It was as if it had known for a long time, but just didn't want to say it out loud. "I want to know everything," it said. "Who is this person? Who is she talking to? How did they meet?" Keller started digging. He used old connections, requested cameras from cafes, call logs, bank statements. A few days later, he came across the name Brian Mendez, a former stuntman. He had a previous conviction for fraud, but no serious convictions. Several years ago, he was hired to shoot a commercial for one of Michael's projects, where, as it later turned out, he met Lauren. Lauren's bank statement showed transfers to BM, one particularly large one, made 3 weeks ago. It matched the date on which she convinced Michael to go alone. There was more evidence, video from a camera in an underground parking garage. In it, a hooded figure is tinkering with Michael's car. The face is not visible, but the gait and build match Mendez. Keller compared the movements with archival footage from the castings where he was selected. "The match is almost perfect." "I think that's enough," Keller said. "Are you ready?" "No," Michael said. "But I will." He returned home in the middle of the day. Usually he would have warned his secretary, called, told security, but this time he entered quietly himself. The house was unusually empty. No music, no Lauren, only her voice in his head from that very recording. He went into the bedroom. Lauren was standing in front of the mirror, changing. She flinched when she saw him. "Michael, are you home? I thought you went to the office." "I'm back," he said. "We need to talk." Of course, something had happened. He looked at her carefully. She was still playing. Her face was worried, her voice sympathetic. "I know everything," he said evenly. For a moment, she did not understand. "What do you know?" "I know that you asked Ed to stay home. I know that your lover cut the brakes. And I heard your recording. You don't play anymore. You are committing a crime." She froze, then looked down, did not cry, did not scream, was silent. She began. "You don't understand what it's like to be with you. All I see is a facade. But you live for work, for numbers, for an empire. And I'm just part of the scenery. You bought my life, Michael. I gave you everything. I believed in us. You believed in the image, not in me." She chuckled. "And now you're going to arrest me?" He pressed a button on his watch. A minute later, 2 plainclothes police officers entered the house. They had a warrant. "Mrs. Thompson, you are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud." Her hands were shaking, but she didn't resist. Her face went blank. Only for a second did she look at Michael. A look that no longer held hatred, only defeat. After that, everything fell apart quickly. Mendez was arrested 2 days later. He tried to leave the city. They found counterfeit documents and cash on him. He remained silent during interrogation, but his correspondence with Lauren was already in the file. The house was empty. The guests stopped coming. The phone calls fell silent. The newspapers hummed. Publics discussed the collapse of the perfect family. But Michael wasn't reading. He was busy with something else. He sat next to Tristan in one of the empty office conference rooms and looked at an old map of the city. "I used to think I could build anything," Michael said quietly. "But you showed me that it's not the height of the building, but the strength of the foundation." "You know," Tristan said, smiling, "sometimes a building needs to be torn down to build something real. Just not made of glass, but of truth." Michael nodded. Now he knew what to do next. In the first days after Lauren's arrest, silence reigned in the house. But it wasn't the silence that brings peace. It was emptiness, a resounding echo of the past. With every wall, every step, Michael remembered how in these same rooms she smiled, touched his hand, looked at him with admiration. And, as it all turned out, it was just a role, brilliant, convincing, but false. Lauren refused to testify. During questioning, she remained silent. Only once did she say, "I just wanted to live my life." After a week of silence, Brian Mendez spoke, not out of remorse, but out of fear. The plea deal with the prosecutor promised him a reduced sentence. He told everything about how Lauren began dating him during filming, how she gradually drew him into her plans, how they discussed first the accidental accident and then their direct intervention. He described the correspondence and plans to move to Mexico immediately after the accident, and even provided voicemails from Lauren. This was the final nail. The prosecutors brought charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, money laundering, and false documents. But for Michael, this wasn't the hardest part. The most painful part was the internal trial, the trial against himself. He asked himself when he had become so detached, when he had become such an easy target. The answer didn't come immediately. One night, he was sitting with Tristan on a rooftop, not the one with the pool and bar, but the old, abandoned roof of a warehouse his company had been planning to demolish for 3 years. From there, he could see the lights of downtown spreading outward, into neighborhoods he'd once considered uninhabitable. "How did you survive?" he asked Tristan. "You mean the street?" he chuckled. "I wasn't surviving at first. I was just surviving, drinking, starving, sleeping under bridges. But then I realized that if no one needs you, you're free. And when you're free, you can finally do what you want, even if it's just sitting and watching the world." And then he fell silent. Then one day you meet someone whose life is more important than yours, and then you become human again. Michael was silent. "I didn't see that everything was falling apart," he said. "I was building a building, and the house was falling apart, building a family, and I was alone. I signed contracts, but inside I was empty." Tristan looked at him with a slight smile. "It's never too late to start building something anew. Only this time not out of concrete." Soon after the trial, Michael sold one of his largest construction companies. He refused to participate in projects where vulnerable families were being evicted. He left the media, handed over management to a new director, and left Chicago for a while. But before that, he did something no one expected. He invited Tristan to live in the annex that had once been used for penthouse guests. He renovated it and installed new furniture. Not luxury, but comfort. Samuel initially refused, saying he didn't want to be a charitable gesture. "That's not charity," Michael said. "It's a duty. You saved my life, and I want you to be a part of it." Thus began their friendship. Every evening, they discussed not business, but people. Stories from the street, the fates of the homeless people Samuel knew. And once, during a conversation about a woman who lived with her children in a car and was afraid of the shelter, Michael said, "What if we create a place where they won't be afraid to go? You want to build another building?" Samuel chuckled. "No, I want to build meaning." That's how the idea for the Second Chance Foundation was born. It wasn't like typical charities. They didn't just hand out clothes and food. They provided temporary housing, psychological help, legal advice, and training. They gave people a chance to get back on their feet and earn respect. Tristan became one of its thought leaders and advisors. He helped develop the Life Restarting program, spoke with new volunteers, and greeted people at the door when they arrived in complete despair. "I'm not a psychologist," he said, "but I know what it's like to think you're trash. And I know how important it is for someone to see you as a human being." The media initially perceived it as a rich man's atonement, but with each passing month, the number of people the foundation helped grew. Stories began to spread without publicity. People whispered to each other, "They don't judge there, they help there." Michael became famous again, but for a different reason. He didn't appear at social events, didn't give interviews, but he was respected not for his suits, but for his actions. And once he spoke at the opening of a new shelter built in an old warehouse, the very same one from the roof of which he and Samuel had spoken. "I built towers," he said. "I thought that higher meant better. But only when I started listening to the street, I realized that you need to build not up, but next to hear, to be close to people." There was silence in the room. He turned to Tristan, standing by the wall. "This man reminded me what it means to be human. Reminded that the truth doesn't shout. It just comes when you're ready to hear." Tristan just smiled, and then, going outside, said quietly to a man standing by the fence, "Sometimes, to save a person, it's enough just not to pass by." It was raining again on the streets of Chicago, not pouring rain, but the kind that seemed to wash the city not from dirt, but from memory. Michael Thompson stood at the entrance to the new shelter of the Second Chance Foundation. Nearby was a modest sign, "Tristan's house." He ran his hand over it. The metal was cold, but his chest felt warmer. This was the last project he personally had a hand in, not as a developer, but as a person. Almost a year had passed since Lauren's arrest. The court found her guilty on all counts. Her lawyers tried to build a defense. She suffered from psychological pressure, depression, and a life in the shadows. But the evidence was too overwhelming. Mendez gave a full statement. She received 8 years without the possibility of parole. Michael did not attend the sentencing. He watched the broadcast in silence, then turned off the screen and went to a shelter. Samuel lived modestly all this time. He did not become a public figure, did not agree to any article. He said, "I don't need to be known. I need to be listened to." He became something of a street mentor. People from all walks of life came to him not for advice, but for understanding. He didn't dispense prescriptions. He simply spoke the truth. One of the foundation's most powerful decisions was the launch of a reintegration program. People from the streets were given a chance to find their way back, without humiliation. Psychologists, lawyers, mentors. Temporary housing. Not a shelter, but a temporary home. Michael insisted, "Everyone who comes must be greeted as a person, not as a problem. We don't solve anyone's poverty," he said at closed meetings. "We're giving people back their right to be heard, and that's more than just help." A true test came when Tristan learned that one of the former officials who supported the foundation had previously helped pass a law that sent hundreds of homeless people homeless. He could have remained silent, but he didn't. "If this person hasn't acknowledged his guilt, he can't be part of the project," he told Michael. "Even if he gives money now, he's changed," Michael tried to argue. "Then let him come to the shelter first, talk to those he'd kicked out, and then give money." And that's exactly what happened. He showed up not in an expensive coat, but without security, without cameras. He spent the day among those he'd once considered social deadwood. He left with downcast eyes and a new understanding. After that, he didn't just become a sponsor. He resigned and became a volunteer. Quietly, without headlines. But one thing remained most important to Michael. He stopped fearing loneliness because he realized that being alone doesn't mean being empty. He built around himself not a team, not a company, but people living with pain, with a past, with a present. And each of them is more important than any millions in the bank. On the day of the opening of the new shelter, about 200 people gathered. Some were formerly homeless, some were volunteers, some were just passers-by who heard about the event. There were no flashes, no TV cameras. Just simple, real people. Michael stepped forward, took the microphone, was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I once thought you could build a tower that would contain happiness. I built dozens of them, but I almost died in one of them because I couldn't hear anyone but myself." He looked around, and then one person, whom I had never seen before, even as part of the street, came up and told me the truth. Simply, without gain, without fear. It saved my life, not only physically. It saved me from myself. He nodded towards Tristan. "This house is named after him because he was the first person who showed me. Truth is, it's not weakness, it's strength. And everyone has the right to a street, a home, a second chance." There was no applause, only a warm, respectful silence. Tristan just stood there, his head slightly lowered. Then he said only one thing. "I just didn't want you to get hit by a car." Everyone smiled. Later, when people began to disperse, a boy of about 10 approached Tristan. He was holding his father's hand and kept looking at the old man like a hero. "Is it true that you saved a billionaire?" he asked in a whisper. Tristan nodded. "How?" "I just told him he shouldn't get in the car." Tristan chuckled. "Sometimes that's enough to change everything." The boy thought about it. "Does that mean I can save someone too someday?" "Of course," Tristan said. "The main thing is not to pass by when you feel that someone is in trouble." When evening came, Michael and Samuel were sitting on the roof again, this time on a new building. They looked out over the city, the same, but completely different. "It could have been different," said Michael. "It was different," replied Samuel.